Welcome back to Josh Impact Insights, your weekly talk show about causes and effects. Firstly, I would like to thank you all for the comments and suggestions sent to us. During COVID crisis, when experts looked at the root cause beyond symptoms, vaccination came out to be an effective solution. Similarly, last week, Anjali provided a diagnosis of the post COVID unemployment crisis, which helped us understand the key underlying problems. So let's continue from where we left off last week and hear her views on the solution. Over to you, Anjali.
India, of course, has this potential to become the skills capital of the world. What we as a nation can do, of course, as I said, India at the national level has been doing a lot. A lot of initiatives are coming up, but what more? Because considering that now the challenges are profound and more or consider aggravated because of the COVID-19 pandemic. So what can be done? So here I've introduced some or I've coined certain terms which will be very interesting. One is the concept of 3 E's. E stands for the 3 E's, basically stand for expansion, enhancement, and empowerment. So when it comes to expansion, for instance, it's important that we should be able to reskill the COVID impacted workforce, especially. So, we can start up a small cluster, say, for instance, in a village or in a district, and, start small training campaigns or small training or skills development campaigns just for those workers who have been displaced, who have lost their jobs due to COVID. So it's like taking a small step, but in the right direction. This is one of the reaching out to the remote areas, one of the expansion techniques. What is important is that in the country today, we need to decentralize, not centralize, but decentralize employment opportunities to avoid labor displacements, which means that generating employment, not only trainings, but also employment in the remote and rural areas of the economy, which is very important considering the extent of loss that has happened to economic activity because of the COVID-19 pandemic and the unemployment situation. Why don't we as a nation use such indicators when we talk about the national progression on the education and the skills development front? Instead of measuring it through enrollment ratios, it's important to measure the gaps with the help of indices which cover the skill gaps, the differentiation between the employed and unemployed youth as a proportion of the education level achieved by a student. Similarly, the survival rate of the student. We need to take into consideration not only the enrollment, but the survival ratio of the students as well. So this is particularly when I say expansion, it's more of reaching out and expanding our horizon of knowledge and to all areas of development, be it rural, urban, semi-urban, semi-rural. Second E, when I refer to, is actually enhancement. And enhancement is more in terms of investment. So here there are certain terms that I have coined. One is basically smart access. Smart access means that we should be more proactive in our smart access provision of facilities such as, computer, even a basic computer, even a basic laptop, and digital and mobile phones or internet access, Wi-Fi access to the remote areas, to workers who are displaced because of COVID. So unemployed. What I'm trying to say is that we as a nation should be proactively engaging the NGOs, reaching out to the NGOs and connecting them to the districts where there is a maximum unemployed youth, ensuring that they have small access of entire digital access through various tools. This is one point. Second is investment for subsidized and quality vocational training. So when I talk about investments, we have a lot of startups in the country, but do we have enough laws to encourage the startup culture? over a period of time, like in COVID-19, we've seen a lot of startups failing because of lack of um, capital, or because of lack of adequate outreach. So why not have a startup culture, cultivate it, and ensure that such investments are subsidized, so that we are able so that culture, if it is encouraged in a particular country, it will also reach out. Third is greater budget allocation. This is something which is very important. We do keep talking about, as I mentioned in previously, that the R&D expenditure as a percentage of GDP, gross domestic product, is even less than 1%. Why can't we have greater budget allocation in these certain fields like education, skills development, healthcare, R&D? Because ultimately they are the premise on which the entire ecosystem of the country is set up. So we can have greater budget allocation, and that doesn't just mean that the onus is just on the government. When we have laws in which the industry, the private sector, has to contribute, say for instance CSR, we can have a knowledge exchange fund in which the industry, as a part of its CSR activity, can contribute a certain percentage for the knowledge exchange fund. That fund can be used at the national level for allocation on research and development. So why can't we have ways and means for the private sector or private industry to pitch in and contribute a portion of their CSR funding into generation of knowledge fund? So what I'm trying to talk about in enhancement is it's important to have collaborations, partnerships, outreach, a startup culture, ensuring that there is smart access of basic digital tools to the remote areas. Here, I would like to also mention that there is a recent study that was done by World Economic Forum, which said that if we do enough investments in upskilling, it could actually boost the Indian economy by $570 billion, adding 2.3 million jobs by 2030. So if we are keeping 2030 as a benchmark, where we say the demographic dividend by the latter half of 2030 is expected to reduce, why not use today as the opportunity to enhance investments till that period, so that we have enough backup in store and we are able to ensure that India becomes one of the top benchmarking countries across the world for skills. Finally, the third E that I would like to mention is empowerment. So empowerment does not just come sitting in isolation. Empowerment comes when the laws and legislation or regulation schemes in the country are favorable for the youth, for the population to grow. So here, empowerment, I have actually coined another term here, saying that F2I, just as we have business to business partnerships, and in industry terminology, we call it B2B, F2I is a term which is from formulation to implementation, which means empowerment can only happen if there are favorable and flexible laws and regulations in the economy. One of the important law or legislation that can be explored in the skills development context is the concept of mandatory delivery or provision of employable skills to the youth. This will ensure that when a youth reaches at a certain stage of employment and is ready for employment, actually, because he or she has been given those skills, it would be easier for the industry to absorb. Besides universalization of primary education, why can't we universalize in the country secondary education as well? So we keep on talking about keep on talking about schemes that mention universalization of primary education. Instead, besides primary, we should also say that primary and secondary both are equally relevant, important for the country to develop. So we in India, as a nation, we can universalize primary as well as secondary education. And finally, I have one important food for thought. Very interesting quote was that it talks about the education system in general. Everybody is a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree. It will live its whole life believing that it is stupid. So that means that you cannot compare the capacity and the capability of two individuals. You cannot expect them to actually run same education races. But we can actually we can actually develop such instruments to cultivate their caliber at a certain level where they feel confident to run the economy.
Thank you so much, Anjali, for taking out the time and sharing such wonderful insights with us. I think having a CSR boosted knowledge exchange fund is a great idea. And I'm sure your message will reach the right corridors of industry and policymakers, and your vision to make India the skills capital of the world will soon be a reality.
Thank you so much for inviting me and sharing my thoughts.